Hey guys, it's Chanel, and I'm here with another article. The article that I read today is titled Sexual Knowledge, Experiences in Pragmatic Language in Adults with and Without Autism, Implications for Sex Education. It was written by Brooke, Kohn, Paige, Vidal, Rachael, Chiao, David, Pantalone, and Susan Faja in June 17th of 2022. So the abstract states, autistic adults have similar levels of desire for sexual and romantic relationships as their non-autistic peers. However, autistic adults are less likely to be in relationships and have less dating experience. We compared sexual knowledge, experiences, and pragmatic language ability in a community sample of young adults with and without autism. Receipt of sex education and sexual knowledge did not differ between groups. However, autistic adults had significantly fewer partnered experiences and impaired pragmatic language. Within both groups, pragmatic skills predicted accurate sexual knowledge above and beyond general communication abilities. Findings suggest that sex education for autistic adults must address the social communication component of healthy romantic and sexual relationships. So the first thing that caught my eye in this article was the quote, "Although autistic adults may desire sexual and romantic relationships, several studies have found that autistic adults are less likely to be in a relationship, have fewer opportunities to date, and have less dating experience than their peers." The purpose of this study was to explore how the knowledge of autistic adults relates with challenges in pragmatic language, skills that may underlie the ability of autistic adults to connect and communicate with potential romantic partners. Across surveys, autistic adults universally rated sexual health education as a gap in their healthcare, despite literature suggesting that autistic adults may be receiving the same formal sex education in school settings as their non-autistic peers. What this tells me is either two things. Sex education isn't tailored enough to those with autism, or sex education is just not beneficial in general. It's not beneficial currently. Findings suggest that autistic adults have comparable knowledge to their peers regarding basic biology, but lower overall knowledge of sexual behaviors, intimate relationships, sexual identity, perceived sexual health knowledge, and awareness of one's sexuality and its impact on others. This is why specific protocols or skills to mitigate these issues is really important. Given the high social demands of pursuing romantic relationships, it is not surprising that navigating these experiences may be particularly difficult for autistic adults who have documented difficulties reading and responding to the social world with expected emotion recognition, pragmatic language, and perspective taking. The article then goes on to explain what pragmatic language is. It refers to the use of language for social communication. It's basically the how someone chooses to say something, and it's a well-documented feature within autism. Some of the deficits in pragmatic language appears to be enduring. What that meant to me was that as a child, if you have difficulties with your pragmatic language skills and you don't really work towards them, you may continue to struggle with those as an adult. Longitudinal work by Clegg et al. Found that at age 30, more than half of participants with reduced pragmatic language abilities had a limited range of friendships, and less than 1/3 had ever been married. Obviously, pragmatic language skills are really important when it comes to social relationships, romantic ones, and this data is really important because it shows that by not having these skills, there's a limited range of friendships and marriages associated with it. This study took two groups of individuals. They took those diagnosed with autism and those non-diagnosed with autism, and they gave them a bunch of different questionnaires and compared the results. Autistic participants included 27 young adults between the ages of 19 to 26 years old with a previous diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, autistic disorder, Asperger's syndrome, or pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified. They also needed to have an IQ of at least 70 or higher. For the non-autistic group, participants included 122 undergraduates between the ages of 18 to 25. So using these two groups, they used a bunch of different measures and compared the data of those measures. Some of the things they used was the Autism Quotient Questionnaire, Wechsler Abbreviated Scale of Intelligence, 2nd edition, Sexual Experiences Questionnaire, Perceived Knowledge of Sexual Health Questionnaire, Knowledge of Sexual Health Questionnaire, and a Sexual Vocabulary Test. These are the results of the study in data form. I'm not too sure how to interpret it, to be honest, so I just wanted to give a visual, and then I'm going to give my thoughts on the discussion aspect. Per the findings of the study, consistent with prior literature, autistic adults reported fewer partnered sexual experiences, but similar solo sexual experiences and sex education opportunities. Further, autistic adults did not differ in accuracy, either for the recognition or vocabulary tasks. Autistic adults did not differ from their non-autistic counterparts in their perceived knowledge of sexual health. Additionally, autistic adults showed significantly lower pragmatic skills related to non-autistic adults when defining sexual autonomy and sexual health terms. What this suggests is that sexual education and experiential learning opportunities for transition-aged autistic youth may be insufficient to support the level of engagement autistic adults desire. How I interpreted that, how you say it sometimes can be more important than what you're saying, right? By the data, it shows that there's not really a big difference between the sexual knowledge when it comes to autistic versus non-autistic adults. But the thing is, the pragmatic language skills that need to be developed or that seem to be intrinsic for neurotypicals, it's just more difficult to develop, right? We can see here that pragmatic language skills are really important when it comes to romantic relationships. Among autistic individuals, pragmatic scores predicted sexual vocabulary accuracy above and beyond recognition accuracy and general verbal ability. This suggests that the ability to socially communicate one's thoughts about sexual terms is an important skill, distinct from one's knowledge of sexual health or of general verbal ability. To me, this meant being able to say what you think sometimes opens the door for knowledge. Having the ability, safety in the right headspace, maybe just having the words, general idea of what you're trying to get across, that opens the door for you to be able to learn more because others can either try to understand what you're saying or provide more information. I just thought that was really interesting. Furthermore, pragmatic scores predicted sexual vocabulary accuracy beyond both recognition knowledge and self-reported communication abilities. This similarly suggests that socially communicating about sexual terms requires additional skills beyond anatomical knowledge or perceived ability to communicate with fears. As I previously said, I feel like how you say it sometimes matters more than what you say. Obviously, the material, you have to be saying something that makes sense, is true, is factual, and is pertinent to the conversation, but also the delivery of it is really important. And I think that is relatable for everyone, but it could also be maybe just a little bit more important for those on the spectrum. Sexual education curricula that simply provides information without developing the skills required to discuss it with others may limit its effectiveness for autistic people. That statement was just like a really good way to package the thoughts that I've been having, where it's like how you say it, obviously what you say too, but how you say it, the capacity in which you say it, the way that you display the information, that really helps with getting your point across. The article also provided an example as to why there's just generally less access to dating advice for those with autism. And in many cases, this can cause harm, embarrassment. A super clear example of this is in a study by Hannah and Stagg, autistic adults identified needing to be explicitly taught dirty talk, a topic that goes beyond the bounds of normative school sexual education that is typically learned through social sources, such as friends and family. Without access to social sources willing to teach about these topics, attempts by autistic adults to supplement sex education with information from sources such as movies, television, and pornography may present them with an unrealistic picture of romantic and sexual activities. Where do you learn how to dirty talk if not with your friends, right? If you have difficulty making friends, difficulty talking to others, how are you going to learn any of these things? And those, again, there's not really clinical professional space in which somebody can learn how to dirty talk. You can't dirty talk with your therapist, but these are skills that a lot of neurotypical people take for granted because they find it to be kind of intrinsic, feel the vibes. I feel as if that, in contrast, there are individuals who would benefit from being a bit more direct with this information, and that's like the pragmatic language skills comes into play, because how do we know when to say something if we're like not even able to say it at all? How do I know when I'm able to dirty talk if I dirty talk and can't even be brought into the room? Potential behavioral consequences of reduced pragmatic language would include difficulty raising conversations about sensitive topics like sexuality or consent, failure to recognize cues that romantic advances may be unwelcomed, trouble understanding innuendos while flirting with a partner, and difficulty identifying situations where formal versus slang sexual terminology may be culturally appropriate. This really reminded me of a conversation that I had. Somebody was telling me about the situation where they were on the bus. They were sitting and a couple rows across from them, a man a little bit older than them, they could tell that they had some type of learning disability. The way in which she said that she knew that was that they kept inappropriately staring at her chest. She obviously was really pissed about it. She felt really annoyed, but she also felt like she couldn't say anything because she was like, well, they're autistic, they don't know better. To me, I get what the sentiment that she's trying to convey, but it's not true. They could know better. Anyone could know better. With access to information, with knowledge, when to look at boobs, when not to look at boobs. Pragmatic language skills. I just really thought of that when it came to this because, one, it is inappropriate what he's doing, but also, no one told him not to do that. No one told him. Maybe he doesn't have any friends or he doesn't have family members that are comfortable enough to be like, hey, you look at boobs during X, Y, and Z, or you look at it when you have consent. You know what I'm saying? Like the whole conversation when it comes to looking at boobs, people do that, but the capacity in which you do it differs. It's really important, and I feel that really fails on us as practitioners to not be giving that skill to our clients. And that skill specifically I mean is pragmatic language skills in dating, sex education, those types of things. The last thing that I want to talk about is some of the limitations of the study. The measures that I stated earlier, none of them have been validated, so it's unclear if the interpretation and the data provided holds any weight. They also stated that written samples were only used to evaluate pragmatic abilities. I'm not sure why that was a limitation, but they stated that. Participants needed an estimated IQ greater than 70 to participate in this study, and therefore our findings may not generalize across the entire autism spectrum. I thought that was really important to state. Oh, super egregious. The autistic versus non-autistic group compared were unequal in number. Also, groups were not matched for age or sex. Both samples were skewed female compared to expected sex ratios, and the non-autistic sample was younger. Given that the group of autistic adults was significantly older, it is possible they had more time to obtain sexual knowledge and romantic experiences compared to their younger non-autistic group. And I thought that really was an interesting point to consider. Obviously, with age, you have more time to know things, to understand things. Through trying to survive masking, older autistic adults may have more sexual knowledge, but that's not to say it was easy, and it's not to say that there are not better ways for other autistic individuals to gain access to that information as well. Lastly, the current sample did not examine how differences in sexual orientation and gender identity may relate to accuracy and pragmatic language skills. Got a test for that. My last thoughts. Collectively, the results of this study indicate that autistic adults have similar knowledge regarding sex and romance compared to their non-autistic peers. However, autistic adults have more difficulty communicating this knowledge efficiently. Exactly, I thought that was the main thing of this article, where it's autistic adults know the same amount, if not more, when it comes to sexual identity, sexual education, and sexual health, anatomy, but they have a difficult time not only conveying it, but also communicating it. I think that as practitioners, that's something that we need to consider when talking about these things with our clients, because I want you to understand what I'm trying to say. I want to figure out the best way to do so, even when it comes to talking about sex. Thank you so much for listening. Please let me know if anything is interesting or came to mind. Any articles that I should read, I'm just kind of finding them like on Google Scholar. Super cool. Peace out. Thanks.